Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, and we're going to find out how the country's doing.
That's a
few
different
ups and downs. Right now, it seems to be a few downs, but looks like we're going to save money all of a sudden. We're going to get rid of all the policemen.
right.
And I sort of agree. We have too many policemen,
Yeah.
and that's part of the problem. It's who should be doing the policing. You know, I've thought about this for years about the federal role in policing, and I would use as an example that the Constitution implied, or rather directly, did not give the federal government the right and the obligation to police the whole country.
Yeah.
And the states were supposed to do that. And of course, there was good recognition that individuals were to participate in too. They're to take care of themselves and their houses and protect them. And they said that you could even use a gun if you have to, and that's why you had a Second Amendment to protect your property. So this has been the case, but I've advocated at times that we should get rid of all the federal policemen.
Federal police, yeah.
And there's 120,000 of
Wow.
them, of bureaucrats that carry guns. And there are 73 different federal organizations that have a military operation to it. And we have 2.5+ million people working for the government. But of all the things that we who have a police force and military, the one that got me was the Department of Education.
Oh, jeez.
They have 3,500 armed police in this country.
Study.
How many do you think we should have?
Yeah.
So, but that's not the complaint. The complaint, I think, is completely lost in the really bad aspect of the police. You know, and we've done programs on the militarization of the police,
Sure.
the break-in, the way they don't follow warrants. I mean, it's really rough and tumble. But that isn't it. This is completely different. I challenge them to really convince me that these riots and all is because they really had deep concern for a black man who was murdered.
Yeah.
You know, which is horrible. But that isn't it. I mean, if they were really concerned about life, and even the statistics bear it out that they're not even justified in saying, well, it looks like we are really in trouble because white people are just out there murdering black people,
Yeah.
which isn't true. There's no statistics for this, but that's what they've been riled up to believe,
Yeah.
and that's why they're getting so much momentum. But this is a real problem now because we've had the coronavirus thing, and then we had the Floyd thing.
Yeah.
They'll probably get something else new once this gets settled down, but. The big question is why does private protection work a lot better than government protection? The guarded communities, the gated communities, we never hear about people going in there and ransacking those houses in there. But the other thing in this whole episode that bothers me is that if you have a policing activity, and I believe there should be some policing activity, should be local, but it should be the people who are destroying the property. Sometimes the people who are protecting their property get more punishment than the people who are destroying the property, and that just excites more hatred and more violence. But quite frankly, we're aware of the fact that that's the goal of some of the individuals involved in what's going on today.
And the the buzzword is defund the police. You're hearing it everywhere. In fact, the Minneapolis City Council voted in a veto-proof majority to defund and disband the police force. It's almost like the Patriot Act, where it was sitting there on the shelf for a while, and when a tragedy happened, they pulled it off and implemented it. This kind of thing doesn't happen overnight. And as you point out, the impetus behind this movement is very curious. In fact, we have a tweet from our friend and colleague Jeff Deist, who put up a tweet earlier today, I think, and it makes the point that the purpose of the law enforcement is to protect life and property. And Jeff writes, the argument for defunding the police is a failure to effectively or justly protect life and property, not a fantasy about whether security is needed at all. Private security companies would have been fired long before whole city blocks burned. So that would be the argument that we would have to defund the police, and that is that they fail in their actual job, which is to defend life and property. They did stand by while the cities were firebombed and destroyed. They didn't lift a finger, really, to help people. But this somehow is not what they are focusing on, the people who are now saying disband, defund the police. As one of the commenters on Jeff's tweet said, Nick Sabo said, he pointed out the people that are calling for the defunding of the police, they want our property to be less secure, not more secure.
Right.
So that's their goal.
So if we have 120,000 federal employees that are carrying guns and abusing the principle of being policemen, they're not concerned with that either. They're concerned about stirring up trouble here at home. They don't talk about the policing activity that we'd like to curtail and quite possibly someday get rid of. That would be like the IRS. Wouldn't that be a good idea if we didn't have IRS? But that's the arm of the far left and the cultural Marxists. That's how you take from one and give to another one. So they're not going to get rid of the IRS. That's a tool that they already have. What about just what we've gone through here in politics since it's 2016? Is we've had this Russiagate, and we've had probably one of the worst abuses of the police, and they're not talking about that. That is the FBI and the CIA, the Justice Department, and it was outrageous, and the evidence is there, and yet nobody is concerned. They're only concerned about those who perpetuate this. How do we do it again? And one's knocked down, they come back again. But all that policing activity is where the real problem is. The Department of Justice. How do you get justice? And these people on the street, they're always saying that's the problem. There's no justice for and it's a racial thing. And yet the whole thing at national level. What about this concept? Even George Bush said, we shouldn't be the policemen of the world, but we are the policemen of the world. And it's militarized. Yes, it's our military, but it is a policing activity. But you don't hear much talk about that either, especially from the conservatives. They might condemn some of this stuff that's going on now, but do they condemn the policing of the world? But on occasion, we see hints of maybe coming our way a little bit on this. But that policing activity, how many people have that killed? This idea that this principle that we are the policemen of the world, how many wars have we fought since 9/11? It's perpetuous, on, and hopefully we run out of money soon so they can't, continue with all these wars.
Well, as horrific as the killing was in Minneapolis at the hands of the police, and you pointed out, it's a great point, this scene has been repeated hundreds of thousands of times overseas when we're policing the world and giving them their freedom and liberation. So, yeah, if you want to start defunding the police, that's a place to start. But the sense is, and our good friend Bob Wenzel covers this very well. The people that are calling for this, the Black Lives Matter movement, which was founded by Marxists, avowed Marxists, what they want is not to achieve a private property society where the police are defunded in favor of private property protecting officers. They want a different kind of police force, a politicized police force, where the police go after political crimes rather than private property crimes or crimes. And it's no surprise that the movement is led by Marxists. They want to use the power of the state for their own political agenda, and that's what we're seeing here. And it's really, under Soviet communism, the police didn't protect people's private property. They didn't protect their personhood. All of their efforts went into pursuing political crimes against, favored special interest groups, be it the Communist Party members or others. So this is what they're calling for. You see a lot of libertarians and anarcho-capitalists are falling for this because, finally there's a movement to do what we've been calling for. Well, careful what you wish for, because this isn't exactly what you think it is.
Yes, and they should be careful. because we have worked hard to try to work with progressives on this particular issue, because here at home there is a lot of injustices, even though they never recognize they talk, the American people must believe that the crimes are mostly done by white on black, and we know that's just a story. But there is a place where I think there's legitimate concern, and that has to do with our drug laws.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to reduce the abuse of police, just get rid of all the drug laws. I mean, let people make their own decisions. I mean, they finally got rid of prohibition of alcohol, so there would be a way of moving in that direction. But I think where the real injustice comes from the drug laws is that when they get to court, statistically, it's really weird. Even if you took white versus black and had the same amount of criminals, which isn't the case.
Yeah.
But if you're black, you get a worse deal in the courts.
Yeah.
And you end up more imprisonment than you would with the white. So there is injustice in the system. But the progressives that we've worked with are quite willing to look at this, and that's why I think that we have an opportunity to present the case as libertarians rather than as ultra-conservatives.
Yeah.
But right now, one of the problems we're having is there's a scarcity of good leftists, progressives. They're just not there. I think they're there. They just don't have a voice. This noise that we hear doesn't represent a lot of good people who are motivated. They have disagreements with us on economic policy, but when it comes to policing activity, there is a lot of activity. But when you think of getting search warrants and how the police knock down the doors, these SWAT operations, and what about even the FISA courts who are dealing with Russiagate? I mean, and there are we know some good journalists that condemn that FISA business, and even if they're not conservative, but they're more libertarian. I think. I have I guess a hope as much as anything, but I happen to believe that the libertarian has a much better chance of bringing people together than any ultra-conservative or radical liberal like we have here, and that you can make inroads with progressives on issues like this, on the race issue. But the one thing that where we have a lot of work to do is getting a better education on economics, which is not the fault of the Nancy Pelosi. It's just the fault that Nancy Pelosi never went to school, and that's why it's so important that people understand it, so that we can come together in all areas. But right now, there's a lot of hostility out there, and of course, I've mentioned so often that the reason why this is climaxing now is that we're in a bankruptcy, moral and financial bankruptcy, and it's a blame game going on, and it's going to get more vicious because we're not getting wealthier. All we're getting is temporary relief by printing a lot of money, and that just makes the problems worse in the end.
We noticed the political component of the coronavirus hysteria. We did not deny the fact that there was a virus, but obviously it was being used for political reasons. And I think we're seeing the same thing now with the mass hysteria over the killing of this person, which obviously is horrible. And we're seeing the media over and over trying to stir people up, trying to stir up a race war, trying to stir up a civil war. And it's really hard to not wonder how much this is aimed toward President Trump's reelection. Obviously, we don't support or not support Trump. We're not here to defend him, but there is a political component to it. But the other thing that's happening, Dr. Paul, is it also seems like America is losing its mind. And the police are losing their mind. On one hand, they're beating up and killing people. On the other hand, they're acting like they've just lost their marbles. We have a couple of clips here that we have to scratch our heads over. Look at the first one here. Here's a police chief of Webster, Massachusetts. His name is Michael Shaw. He participated in the protests by laying down on his face for 8 minutes. This is very strange behavior. And then, not to be outdone, in Cary, North Carolina, we have that next clip. Police are lining up and washing the feet of protesters. Kind of a show of humiliating themselves in front of the protest leaders. And you say, okay, well, maybe this is healing, but it's awfully weird. And in fact, we again turn to our good friend Bob Wenzel for some enlightenment. And he talks about the Cultural Revolution in Mao's China. And a lot of this is very, very strikes a chord where the respected figures in society, teachers and others, had to humiliate themselves. In fact, Bob put up a couple of pictures. Here's being forced to admit to your crimes with a big, tall dunce cap on. And there's another one. This is from Mao's Cultural Revolution, which killed millions and millions of people. Bob puts up in his Target Liberty post a little bit about what were called struggle sessions under the Cultural Revolution in China. A struggle session was a form of public humiliation and torture used by the Communist Party of China in the Mao Zedong era to shape public opinion and humiliate, persecute, or execute political rivals and class enemies. In general, the victim of a struggle session was forced to admit to various crimes before a crowd of people who would verbally and physically abuse the victim until he or she confessed. Now, if this is not what it looks like with these pictures, I don't know what does.
See, and then the next step is if they don't do this, they will be declared mentally ill and they'll be put into an institution, which is part of the whole role of the authoritarians, believing that they need re-indoctrination, and that is true. The one underlying concern I have is I think the founders were astute in saying that what they were trying to give us, a constitutional limited government, a lot of responsibility at home, a lot of responsibility for individuals, and they had confidence that it would work, but they had one caveat. They said, it won't work unless you have a moral society.
Yeah.
And you've already said a few things that makes you think, hey, is that the basic problem? Actually, I think it is. It's a moral, ethical problem that creates attitudes about what kind of government we have. And we do end up getting the kind of government that the people endorse. So we're in a real philosophic battle right now. And what you just showed makes me concerned that the Antifa people, if they win this and it's their attitudes that grab hold, the whole system comes crashing down. But yes, there's competition and it doesn't make sense, but there's also a philosophic competition here. And the question is, do we believe in personal liberty and responsibility? And is the government there to protect that, or is the government there to police everything that we do? And back to the best example we have to modify behavior, and if you don't, you get put in jail, are the drug laws.
Yeah.
But now they branch over easily to religious attitudes. How about during the lockdown? I mean, it's so, and write about this today. People can't even go to church.
Yeah.
And church, it was easier to go to a bar than to a church. Some of the crazy stuff going on. So that needs sorted out, believe me. And yet, I still think. There's a lot of people in this country who must be sick of all this. And as a matter of fact, we had a little bit of encouragement when they finally, a lot of people got sick and tired of the lockdown.
Yeah.
And for good reason and the right reason. I've seen some great statements by people that stood up to them. And it's pretty amazing when they stand up to them. The police can just fade away. If you have 25 people there, yes, they can be a gang and a monster and be very threatening. But what if you have 25 people confronting the police and say, look, what law is it that you're enforcing?
Yeah.
Is this constitutional? Do we have a right to go to church? Do we have a right to assemble? And if you do that calmly and confront them, it's amazing. We've seen examples where that has worked. And the police, they probably haven't thought the stuff through. They just sort of, fall on a crowd, and that's what you're seeing there when the policemen are laying on the ground saying, "I'm innocent. What all I want to do is scrub your feet, and everybody will be happy." So this is something that I think we're really in a struggle over on which side of this argument prevails, and but people have to argue, what the principle is, and I think that. What type of government we have is always a reflection of a philosophic understanding of what government should do and allowed and endorsed or encouraged by the people. So when you see the crowds out there, actually we had two crowds out there, at least in theory, and some of them were some of them, I mean, you can understand why somebody would say, that is atrocious. I mean, even looking at what we've written about police brutality, the militarization of the police and all this, they say, well, why shouldn't we stand and protest? This is excessive. Everybody knows that. So I could see why somebody would do that. But they might be being used, is the big question. So what's the overriding issue? What is the ultimate goal that they have?
Yeah, what is the goal? And that's the big question. There's got to be a happy medium between the police killing blacks and washing their feet. You know, there's got to be something in the middle.
Yeah.
And that something in the middle is what you've talked about for so many years, and that's respect for private property and individual liberty, which would be the answer to all of these problems. But I'll just close out, Dr. Paul, by reminding everyone that something that seems like people have forgotten, and you've written about this today too, a little thing called coronavirus. Let's put up my second to last thing that I want to put up today. This, look at this, daily deaths in the U.S. Look how this has gone down, 300 as of yesterday. And let's see the next clip. Here's what the CDC said: 3,000 virus deaths in the U.S. by June. This is the CDC. This is what we're all supposed to listen to. Do everything they say. Cover your mouth. Don't shake hands. Don't talk to people. Stay away from each other. They said that by right now we should be having 3,000 deaths a day. Yesterday we had 300. That's too many, of course, and it's very sad. But they're so wildly off. They've been so wildly off through this whole thing that whatever credibility they once had, hopefully will be shot, and hopefully governors like our own governor will start looking at this and saying, why have I done an elaborate plan to reopen Texas based on the recommendations of the CDC?
And the solution is not too complicated. We know what the solution is to protect the First Amendment. The church and state, separation of church and state. And most everybody knows that's the case, even though they abuse it by not letting you go to church. But what about the medicine? And I can date in history when a lot of things went wrong on medicine the last 100 years or so, where it was always assumed that the government should be involved, and now they pay for it and they control it. So Fauci, he's government, and even though he might argue the case, he's government, and they're promoting it. So it's the fact that there's too much government and medicine put together, and this is what they give us. They give us this monstrous thing where medical care, they tell you that you can't take chloroquine. It's bad for you. It'll kill you. And it might turn out it did turn out that the two articles that scared people to death about using it had to retract their articles. And that means there's too much combination. The government is really, unless it's very limited, is really most of the time not our friend. They're too much of a policing operation, and that's where the real police is. If you believe in big government, yes, you need a lot of police. If you believe in an empire, you need a lot of world police. And if you need a do-gooder to tell people how to live, then you have to have a lot of police. So I don't like the police in that sense. The police is okay when there's somebody that needs to settle a dispute and when there's something locally. But there was never an intention to have a world national police operation that we have today. So they're unauthorized, and everything of that policing activity that was going on with coronavirus, it was unethical, immoral, and it was certainly unconstitutional, and all it did was make things worse. It did not save lives and probably led to a lot more people dying from it. And the people need to wake up to this. And now that it's subsiding, maybe they can take a more objective look at what's going on. But anyway, liberty is the answer to our problems, and we need faith and confidence into and an understanding of how it really works. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.